The History of Freemasonry, Its Legends and Traditions, Its Chronological History, by Dr. Albert Gallatin Mackey, 33rd degree. The History of the Symbolism of Freemasonry, the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, and the Royal Order of Scotland, by William R. Singleton, 33rd degree, with an addenda by William James Hugan, Volume 1. Published by the Masonic History Company, New York and London. There's the author, Dr. Mackey. There seems no human thought so primitive as to have lost its bearing on our own thought, nor so ancient as to have broken its connection with our own life. Tylor, Primitive Culture. Preface. So comprehensive a title as the one selected for the present work would be a vain assumption if the author's object was not really to embrace in a series of studies the whole cycle of Masonic history and science. Anything short of this would not entitle the work to be called The History of Freemasonry. Freemasonry as a society of long standing has, of course, its history, and the age of the institution has necessarily led to the mixing in this history of authentic facts and of mere traditions or legends. We are thus led, in the very beginning of our labors, to divide our historical studies into two classes. The one embraces the legendary history of Freemasonry, and the other its authentic annals. The legendary history of Freemasonry will constitute the subject of the first of the 5 parts into which this work is divided. It embraces all that narrative, the rise and progress of the institution, which, beginning with the connection with it of the antediluvian patriarchs, ends in ascribing its modern condition to the patronage of Prince Edwin and the assembly at York. This narrative, which in the 15th and up to the end of the 17th century claimed and received the implicit faith of the craft, which in the 18th century was repeated and emendated by the leading writers of the institution, and which even in the 19th century has had its advocates among the learned and its credence among the unlearned of the craft, has only recently, and by a new school, been placed in its true position of an apocryphal story. And yet, though apocryphal, this traditionary story of Freemasonry, which has been called the legend of the craft, by some the legend of the guild, is not to be rejected as an idle fable. On the contrary, the object of the present work has been to show that these Masonic legends contain the germs of an historical, mingled often with a symbolic idea, and that, divested of certain evanescences in the shape of anachronisms or of unauthenticated statements, these Masonic legends often, nay, almost always, present in their simple form a true philosophic spirit. To establish this principle in the literature of Freemasonry, to divest the legends of the craft of the false value given to them as portions of authentic history by blind credulity, and to protect them from the equally false estimate that has been bestowed upon them by the excessive incredulity of unphilosophic skeptics, who view them only as idle fables, without more meaning than what they attach to monkish legends. In one word, to place the legendary history of Freemasonry in the just position which it should occupy, but has never yet occupied, is the object of the labors expended in the composition of the first part of this work. The second part of the work will pass out of the field of myth and legend and be devoted to the authentic, recorded history of Freemasonry. Rejecting as wholly untenable and unsupported by historical evidence the various hypotheses of the origin of the institution in the pagan mysteries in the Temple of Solomon or in the Crusades, an attempt has been made to trace its birth to the Roman colleges of artificers, which present us with an almost identical organization of builders and architects. Following the progress of the Roman masons of the colleges through their visits to the different provinces of the empire, where they went, accompanying the legions in their victorious excursions, we will find that the art of building was communicated by them to the Italians, the Spaniards, the Gauls, and the Britons. In this way, the knowledge of operative masonry and its practice in guilds, sodalities, and confraternities was preserved by these peoples after the extinction of the Roman Empire. We next find this sodality emerging in the 10th century from Lombardy and under the name of traveling Freemasons, preambulating all Europe and re-establishing confraternities of stonemasons in Germany, France, England, Scotland, and other countries. The narrative of the progress of this fraternity of builders from Como, which was evidently an outshoot from the ancient Roman colleges, is treated with great particularity, because without the aid of any mythical or legendary instrumentality, we are thus enabled to connect it continuously with the modern system of operative masonry. The merging of operative into speculative masonry in the beginning of the 18th century is an historical incident based on the most authentic records. Its details, derived from records of whose genuineness there never has been a doubt, will complete and perfect the history of Freemasonry from its rise to its present condition. Thus, we may imagine the growth of that magnificent tree beneath whose wide-spreading branches the fraternity now recline. In the far remote reign of Numa, the philosophic and religious king of Rome, or if his personality be doubted, by the disciples of Niebuhr, in the times represented by his name, we find the germ of the institution in those organized confraternities of craftsmen whom history records as flourishing with varying success and popularity through the times of the kingdom, the republic, and the empire of Rome. The seeds of a cooperative association of builders based on the principles of fraternity were carried with the legions of Rome into the various provinces that had been conquered by the soldiers of the empire, and as colonies of Romans were there established, the Latin language, the manners and customs of the Roman people, and their skill in the arts were introduced among the natives. Of these arts, the most important was that of architecture, and by means of monuments still remaining, as well as other historical evidences, we are enabled to follow the gradual growth of the operative societies out of the Roman guilds, and then that of the speculative institution out of the operative societies. The hypothesis sought to be sustained in investigating the history of Freemasonry in the present work may be succinctly stated as follows. Operative Masonry is the basis on which speculative Freemasonry is founded. That is to say, the lodges of Freemasons of the present day are the successors of the lodges of operative Masons, which existed all over Europe during the Middle Ages and up to the beginning of the 18th century. But the operative Masonry that gave birth to the modern speculative order was not the mere craft or trade or art of building. The men who practiced it were not mere cutters and layers of stone. There were large numbers of workmen belonged to a lower class of the trade or profession, were never looked upon with any respect, with whom companionship was denied, and who were employed only in subordinate positions. These men were called cowans, rough layers, foreigners, or similar titles intimating degradation of class and inferiority of skill.